The morning I found the Venmo records. Lacey was 4 weeks pregnant and making pancakes in the kitchen, singing something off-key to a playlist I didn't recognize. That's the image I keep coming back to. The smell of butter on the griddle. Her voice just slightly flat on the high notes. The ordinary Tuesday morning feeling of a life I thought I understood. Then I picked up her phone off the counter. Same rose gold case as mine, easy mistake, and saw the screen light up with a notification I wasn't supposed to see. 3 weeks later, my mother called me from her kitchen in Colorado Springs and said, "Wade, I need you to think about what's best for this family. Not just what's best for you right now." That sentence, "not just what's best for you," told me everything I needed to know. My mother had chosen a side before I even knew there were sides to choose. My name is Wade Calloway. I'm 33 years old, and I grew up believing that family was the one thing you could count on when everything else fell apart. I believed that for a very long time. I believed it right up until the moment I realized my family had been counting on me to stay quiet while they fell apart around me. My cousin Silas had lived with us from the time he was 11 years old. His parents went through a divorce that turned ugly in the way. Only divorces involving cash businesses and bad lawyers can turn ugly. And my parents stepped in and gave him a bedroom down the hall from mine. So he wasn't a cousin in the distant Christmas card sense. He was the person who ate breakfast at our table, who drove me to school when I was too young to drive myself, who my parents introduced at every gathering as practically our son. He was 36 when all of this happened. Tall, easy-natured, the kind of good-looking that made him seem more trustworthy than he was. He had spent his adult life selling commercial real estate in Denver, which meant he had mastered the art of making people feel like the most important person in the room, right up until the moment they signed. He drove a truck he couldn't fully afford and called it a business expense. He told stories about himself that were 70% true, which is the most dangerous kind of lie. My parents loved him in a way that had always been slightly out of proportion to what he'd earned. When he forgot to show up to my father's retirement party because he had a client dinner, my father said the client dinner was important and let it go. When he borrowed $3,000 from my mother and paid back $2,000 and change, my mother said he was going through a hard quarter and let that go too. When he missed my wedding because he was, his words, dealing with some stuff, my mother told me that he had a complicated relationship with commitment and that I should be more understanding. I was understanding. I was always understanding. That was my assigned role in the family. Same way his role was to be forgiven. I met Lacey at a work conference in Phoenix when I was 28. She was there representing a sports medicine clinic. I was there for a software company I was consulting for at the time, and we both reached for the last coffee cup at the same moment, and she said, "You look like you need it more than I do." Honestly, I did not need it more, but I let her think so, because it was a good opening line and I didn't want her to stop talking. We dated for 2 years and married in a small outdoor ceremony in Estes Park. 30 people, wildflowers. No band because bands at outdoor weddings always feel performative. My cousin didn't come. He sent a card with a Home Depot gift card inside, which somehow felt exactly right. For the first 3 years of our marriage, things were good in the way that good things are. Not dramatic, not storybook, just solid. We bought a house in Lakewood with a big backyard and a kitchen that needed work. Lacey built her physical therapy practice from 11 clients to 47. I moved from consulting into a full-time systems analyst role at a logistics firm downtown. We argued about the same things most couples argue about: whose turn it was to deal with the HVAC filter, whether we were spending Thanksgiving with her family or mine, whether I was too inside my own head when I was stressed. I was too inside my own head when I was stressed. I will admit that freely now. The distance started about 18 months before the end. I noticed it the way you notice a slow leak. The pressure just gradually feels different, and by the time you check, there's already damage you can't see. Lacey started texting more and putting her phone face down when I walked into the room. She started going to a yoga studio on Thursday evenings that I couldn't find any record of online. She laughed differently around my cousin, brighter, quicker. Like she was performing rather than enjoying herself. He started coming around more. He offered to help us retile the backsplash in the kitchen, which was strange, because he had never voluntarily picked up a tool in his life. He texted Lacey about neighborhood restaurant openings and sent her articles about things she was interested in. I told myself it was family. I told myself I was reading into things because I was stressed at work and not sleeping well. Nobody wants to name the worst thing in the room while there's still a chance there. They're wrong. When Lacey told me she was pregnant, we were sitting in the backyard at dusk with glasses of iced tea, which is how she had planned it. She'd wanted it to be calm, outdoors soft. She handed me a card she'd made herself, and inside was a sonogram printout. My first instinct was to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do with that much feeling at once. I held her face in my hands and said, "We're going to be such good parents." She started crying. I assumed it was relief, joy, the weight of a secret finally released. I held her for a long time in the backyard while the sky went dark. I didn't ask about the expression underneath the crying. The one that wasn't quite happiness. I should have asked about that. We told the family the following Sunday at my parents' house. My mother cried and hugged Lacey, and said she'd been waiting for this for years. My father shook my hand and looked genuinely moved. Which was rare for him. My cousin was there, the way he usually was at family dinners. When we made the announcement, I watched his face. He went white for 3 full seconds. Then he raised his glass and said, "To the next generation," and smiled so wide I could tell it was constructed rather than felt. I noticed my mother look at him, instead of at me when everyone clapped. I noticed Lacey stare at the table. I told myself it was nothing. I was happy. Happy people talk themselves out of the truth all the time. 6 days later, I picked up Lacey's phone off the kitchen counter by mistake. Our cases were identical, and the screen was already unlocked, a Venmo notification. Payment received from a contact listed as just an initial, with a string of neutral emojis and no description. $180. I set the phone down. Then I opened the Venmo app on my own phone, and searched her account activity. 14 transactions over 4 months. All from or to the same contact. Small amounts. The kind that looked like splitting dinner or covering parking. But spaced out in a pattern that had nothing to do with dinner. Thursday nights and Saturday mornings. Almost every week. I didn't say anything that day. I went to the garage and sat in my truck for an hour with the engine off, going through every explanation. That wasn't the one I already knew was true. I found the rest of it over the next 2 days. Location data in her phone settings showing her at an address I looked up. His apartment building. 8 times over 3 months. A deleted text thread I recovered through her cloud backup, using the login she'd given me years ago. For a shared streaming account. 40-something messages, mostly short, but enough. I read every one. I wish I hadn't. I also wish I'd found them sooner. I waited until she got home from work on a Wednesday. She walked in with groceries and started talking about a patient making real progress with a rotator cuff recovery. I put my phone on the counter, with the Venmo history pulled up. She stopped talking mid-sentence. "How long?" I asked. She set the bags down slowly. "Wade. How long?" She pressed her hand flat against the counter. 7 months, she said. 7 months. Our marriage was 4 years old, and a third of the last year had belonged to someone else. I asked the only question that actually mattered then. She already knew what it was before I finished saying it. "Is the baby mine?" The pause lasted long enough to tell me everything. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know." I have thought about those 3 words approximately 10,000 times since. Not because I needed her to say more. Because those 3 words were the entire floor dropping out from under me at once. I drove to a hotel that night, not his neighborhood. Somewhere empty and impersonal, where nobody had any history, and nobody expected anything from me. At 11:43 my phone rang, my mother. She knew before I said a single word. I could tell by the careful way she asked how I was doing. The way a person speaks when they are not actually asking a question. "She told you," I said. A silence then. "Wait, I need you to hear me out. When did you know?" Another silence. "About 6 weeks ago. Your cousin told your father and me because..." She stopped. "Because he didn't know what else to do." 6 weeks. My mother had sat across from me at Sunday dinner, asked about my commute, passed me the potatoes, and known for 6 weeks. "And you decided not to tell me." "We wanted to wait until there was something certain to tell you. Wade, there is a baby now and..." I ended the call. He texted me at 7 the next morning. "Heard you and Lacey had a rough night. I think we should talk." I stared at the message. Then I typed back, "You slept with my wife for 7 months. We're not talking, we're done." He left me on read for 11 minutes. Then, "It's not that simple, Wade, you know that." I did not respond. I drove to my parents' house in Colorado Springs that afternoon. My mother met me at the door in her housecoat, her face tight with a worry I recognized as being mostly for herself. My father stood in the hallway. My cousin's truck was in the driveway. Of course it was. I walked past my mother without stopping. He was at the kitchen table with a coffee mug, and the normalcy of it. My parents' kitchen, my father's favorite chair, made something cold settle in my chest. "Get up," I said. My mother said, "Wade, please, let's all be calm." "How many times?" I asked him. He set the mug down. He looked at me the way people look at you when they've rehearsed remorse but haven't quite felt it yet. "It wasn't something I planned," he said. "That's not what I asked." He made a terrible mistake, my mother said, and I turned to look at her slowly. A mistake, I repeated. She started crying. She had always been good at that. I had watched her cry her way through 30 years of excusing his choices. And I had always respected those tears before. Right then they looked like a tool she'd picked up so many times. She didn't know she was holding it anymore. My father said, "Nobody wanted this outcome, son." I said, "Then you should have told me 6 weeks ago." My mother straightened. "We were protecting the baby. The stress of something like this in the first trimester." "You were protecting him," I said. "You've been protecting him since he was 11 years old." She shook her head. "That's not fair." "Mom." I kept my voice level. "You have spent 30 years giving that man every benefit of every doubt he never earned. And now you want me to raise his child so nobody has to be uncomfortable at Christmas. That is not family, that is a pattern." She said, "Biology isn't the only thing that makes a father." I looked at her for a long moment. "You've used the word family to mean whatever you needed it to mean for as long as I can remember. When he needed loyalty, family meant I had to forgive him. When he needed cover, family meant I had to stay quiet. Now you're telling me biology doesn't matter. Because the one time it actually does matter, it's inconvenient for you." Nobody said anything. My father cleared his throat. "What do you want to happen here, Wade?" My cousin said, "Come on, you and Lacey can work through this." I turned to him. "You don't get to use my name right now. You don't get to tell me what Lacey and I can do." I picked up my keys from the counter. "What I want is a paternity test. What I want is an attorney. What I want is for everyone in this room to understand that I will not be cleaning up this mess. Not this one." My mother reached for my arm. "Please, think about the baby." I stopped. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "I am thinking about the baby. I'm thinking that a child deserves to know who their father actually is. That's the most honest thing I can do for them." I left before anything else could be said. The attorney my coworker recommended was named Ms. Fowler. Steady-eyed, 50s, the kind of person who has seen enough human disaster to be unsurprised by any of it. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Then, she said, "Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything verbally, and do not put your name on a birth certificate before paternity is confirmed." Lacey agreed to the prenatal test. I think by then she was exhausted by the weight of not knowing. We met at the clinic on a Friday morning. She tried to say something in the waiting room. Something about not having meant for things to go so far. I looked at the window instead of at her. Not out of cruelty, because I didn't have anywhere to put what I was feeling, and, looking at her made it worse. The results came back on a Thursday. Ms. Fowler called me into her office and slid a single page across her desk. Probability of paternity for Wade Calloway. 0%. He was the father, not me. I drove home and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside, made a cup of coffee I didn't drink, and let myself cry for the first time in all of it. Not dramatically. Just enough to acknowledge that something real had ended, and something real had been confirmed. Those are two different kinds of grief. And both of them arrived at the same time. Then I dried my face, and started making copies of everything. My mother had organized a family dinner for the following Sunday. She texted the extended family. Her phrase was "come together for a difficult conversation." My father's younger brother, my Uncle Gus, called me the night before and said, "Your mother is telling people you're abandoning Lacey while she's pregnant." I already knew that. It was the story that made her the brave, worried grandmother and made me the cold husband who couldn't handle adversity. I said, "Will you come Sunday?" He said, "Already planned on it." I arrived with a folder under my arm. Same dining room table where my cousin had eaten 400 dinners. Same family photos on the wall with him in half of them, standing next to me with his arm around my shoulders, like a man who had never done anything wrong in his life. My aunt was there. 2 cousins, my parents' neighbors, who had known me since I was a child, and would remember whatever happened in that room today. My mother started the moment I sat down. "Thank you for coming. I know tensions are high, and I think we all need to focus on moving forward as a family." I placed the folder on the table. She looked at it, the way people look at things they were hoping wouldn't arrive. Sim. I put down the Venmo records first. 14 transactions, dates highlighted. Then Lacey's written statement, her account of the affair, the timeline, the information my parents had withheld from me. Then the prenatal paternity test, printed on Ms. Fowler's firm letterhead, with the accredited lab documentation attached. My aunt said, "Oh God." My cousin pushed back in his chair. "You didn't have to do this here." I looked at him. "You did what you did in my house, in my marriage, in my family. I'm doing this in a dining room." My mother stood. "This is a private family matter." Uncle Gus said quietly and without heat, "Sit down." She sat. That surprised everyone, including her. I looked around the table. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I'm here so that no one can claim later that they didn't know. That is the one thing this family has always given him. The option to pretend that the people who got hurt just didn't understand what happened. I am making sure everyone in this room understands what happened. My cousin said. You're doing this because you want everyone to watch me fail. No, I said. I'm doing this because you failed before I got here, and you were counting on me to cover it up. My mother said, her voice breaking. There is a baby coming who is innocent. Yes, I said. And that baby has a father sitting at this table right now, and that father is not me. I looked at him directly. Step up or don't, but it will not be my responsibility either way. Uncle Gus spoke for the first time. The boy is right. Before anyone argues that point, I want you to look at what's in that folder, and ask yourselves, honestly, how much longer you would have kept this from him. Nobody answered. That silence was its own kind of answer. I walked out, while my mother was still saying my name. The divorce process was orderly, if nothing else. Lacey didn't fight much. I think she understood that there wasn't anything left to fight for. She moved into an apartment in Aurora with her sister. My cousin did not move in with her, which told me everything about the kind of father my parents had been trying to volunteer me to replace. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Lacey asked to meet for coffee. I went because Miss Fowler had said something that stuck with me. Closure can be useful, but keep your head clear. She looked tired. Not unhappy. Just stripped of something that used to be there. She said he's not involved. He sends money when he's legally pushed to, but he isn't involved. I stirred my coffee. Surprised, I said with a flatness that made it clear I wasn't. She flinched. Then she nodded. I deserve that. She looked at her hands on the table. I used the problems in our marriage as a reason to do something I already knew was wrong. He made me feel chosen. I wanted to feel chosen. And instead of telling you that I felt invisible, I told myself it was your fault. And I used that as a permission slip. That was the first truly honest thing she had said to me in longer than I could pinpoint. No deflection, no hormones. No, it just happened. Just ownership of a choice. I said. I hope you become a better mother than you were a wife. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue it. I'm trying, she said. When I left that coffee shop, I didn't feel free. People say the truth sets you free, and I think that's right in the long run. But in the short run, the truth doesn't free you. It just removes your excuses for standing still. You still have to do the walking. My father came to my apartment in Lakewood about 4 months later. He stood in the doorway and looked smaller than I remembered him being. Which is what happens to men. When they finally put something down. They've been carrying longer than they should have. He said. I should have told you the day he came to us. I leaned against the doorframe. I didn't invite him in yet. Why didn't you? He actually thought about it. Took his time. Because I wanted it to go away. Because your mother needed to believe he could still be protected. And I let her need that matter more than your right to know. I said. She spent her whole life mothering 2 sons. The one who needed it, and the one she decided needed it. My father didn't argue the point. I'm sorry, Wade, not as an explanation, just as a fact. I said I believe you. Then I said, but I don't trust the same way I used to. I don't know if that comes back. He said, that's fair, and he meant it. That mattered more than anything else he said that day. My cousin relocated to Austin not long after. I heard this from my uncle, not from anyone in my immediate family. He started over somewhere new, with people who didn't know the shape of what he'd left behind. That sounded exactly like him. My mother wrote letters for a while. She sent a card on my birthday, with a long note about how she missed having both her boys together. As if we were both victims of a storm that nobody had caused, and nobody could have prevented. I returned the card unopened. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Which I had spent 33 years confusing for the same thing. Uncle Gus and I drove out to a reservoir, near Woodland Park 2 weekends running, and caught nothing either time. He said that was the point. On the drive back, the second weekend, he said, you know what you did, right? You didn't wait for anyone's permission to tell the truth. I thought about that for a long time. I started therapy in the spring. I learned to cook something that required more than one pan. I started running again, badly and inconsistently, and that was fine. I adopted a dog from a shelter in Jefferson County. A 4-year-old mutt, with one ear that stayed up and one that folded over, like he couldn't quite commit to a mood. I named him something my former family would have found undignified, and I liked that about it. Sometimes I think about the baby. A girl, I heard through Lacey's sister. I wonder what she will be told when she is old enough to ask. I hope she hears the full truth eventually. Not because I want her to carry the weight of it, but because children always sense the shape of the thing being kept from them, long before they can name it. I grew up in that house. I know exactly how that works. My parents asked me to raise his child, so nobody had to look directly at what he had done. They called it family. They called it stepping up. They called it what the baby needed. What she needed was a father who would actually show up, and she had one. He just wasn't me. I was done being the solution to problems I didn't create. That's not a cold thing to say. That's just finally understanding the difference between love and obligation. And choosing, for the first time in my life, to be responsible only for what was actually mine.